So, how hot is too hot exactly? And what can we do about it? To answer this question, researchers create numerical models of the climate with various emission scenarios representing humankind's different possible choices. They test the outcomes of each scenario in terms of climate futures and the consequences for human and natural systems. The IPCC reports compile results from such experiments. The high-emission IPCC scenario, called RCP 8.5, pictures temperature increases from 3.2 to 5.4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels by 2100. In technical terms, this is called a business-as-usual scenario, and yet it could not be further from business as usual. Such a scenario also includes a sea level rise up to 1 metre, an ice-free Arctic, the disappearance of a number of ecosystems, and the multiplication of droughts, floods, hurricanes, heat waves, and forest fires. The cost of extreme sea level events and coastal storms could exceed 10% of the world's GDP in 2100, without factoring in impacts on agriculture, air quality, insect plagues, or forced migrations. It is hard to put numbers on such consequences, as they could largely disrupt the world as we know it. Think that 15,000 years ago and 4 degrees less, you could walk from Norway to England and mammoths thrived from America to Africa, having been there for several million years. You cross some lines, and GDP calculations cannot reflect the magnitude of expected changes. GDP just does not apply anymore. The question is, what is the line we should not cross? For the global scientific community, this line of no return is a 2 degrees centigrade temperature increase. 1.5 degrees C already appears as a dangerous threshold, yet above 2 degrees C, there is no guarantee that we will not trigger runaway reactions in the climate machine, entering totally uncharted territory. Staying below 2 degrees centigrade does not mean that there will not be some consequences, some of them irreversible, but we can still foresee them, and more importantly, adapt to them to some extent. If you think that 2 degrees do not make a huge difference, think of your body temperature. If it climbs to 38 degrees centigrade, you may not feel that well. Above 40 degrees, you'd better go to the hospital straight away. In a 2 degrees centigrade world, 37% of the world's population will experience severe heat waves every 5 years. The Arctic ice will disappear every 10 years, average crop yields will drop by 7%, and coral reefs will virtually disappear. Now, is even the 2 degrees centigrade target still realistic? In theory, it is still possible. However, temperatures have already climbed 1 degree centigrade since 1850. We are facing a real challenge, but the 2 degree target is realistic. Since CO2 accumulates in the atmosphere, we need to act now to stay below 2 degrees centigrade. Global greenhouse gas emissions should decline by 20% before 2030 and 80% by 2050. Only 1/5 of the known fossil fuel reserves can be burnt by 2050. 1/3 of this global carbon budget was consumed between 2000 and 2011. We need to realize, sooner rather than later, that the Stone Age did not end for a lack of stones, and the fossil age should end before we burn the last chunk of coal. This represents an unprecedented transition in energy, land use, urban planning, infrastructure and industrial systems. It has short-term costs, yet the cost of inaction is way, way higher. But the transition could bring its own benefits. Oh, and by the way, it has already started.